Hello, Claire. Before we dive into what you're doing now, I would love to start with your journey. With a 25-year pedigree in technology strategy and transformation, what drew you into tech? And at what moment did you realize that ethics, inclusion, and advocacy for women and children would be such a central part of your work?
Big question, and hello to you both, by the way. Thank you so much for
Hi.
having me on your esteemed podcast, which
Oh,
everybody talks about. So I'm very excited to be included. Okay, so back at the beginning, what took me into tech? I realized, I think, really early on in my career that if you didn't have a degree, then you had to be useful. I've said this a few times on different programs, and it always seems to resonate with people. I had a huge chip on my shoulder for the fact that I didn't have a degree. So I was constantly comparing myself to all of my kind of peers at my own age and friends in my circles. And I realized really, really early on that if you could make yourself really, really useful to people, then that put you into different rooms. It opened up doors that weren't otherwise open, especially to a woman without a degree, especially to a woman coming into the workplace at 22 years old with a baby at home. I wasn't exactly a great hire. I didn't exactly feel like a great hire at the time. But I realized that some really simple skills were skills that other people didn't have at the time. And those skills were PowerPoint and Excel and Word and Access. They were kind of like the early Microsoft skills, and people just didn't have those skills. And I realized that actually, if I learned how to do those things really well, it made me super useful to senior people. So I always felt like my career was a bit of a backdoor start, because I started off by PAing and administrating for senior people. And I realized, again, this is a really smart way to get into the rooms where people are making big decisions. If you can be liked and be useful by senior people, then that's your it's your way to push through some of these doors that are otherwise closed to you. So I did just that. I became the person in the room that was really good at taking your ideas and drawing a pretty picture in PowerPoint, which sounds like such a simple thing, but I can honestly say over 25 years of my career, that ability to listen to a room, to take the thinking and to visualize it for people, to play it back in a visual that makes sense, that's probably the core skill that I've hung on to. In fact, if I could go back and apply AI now, I don't think I'd have a career, because AI would be doing all of that for me. But yeah, I think I got into tech because I realized that tech worked for me. It was the thing that made up for not having the business degree or not having the degree that everybody else had, that I had this better set of skills. I had this ability to be useful in rooms. And that, I think, started me on that path. And then I think really quickly, I realized something else, which was roles in tech paid more, quite simply.
Yeah.
And as a project manager, so I found myself into project management because I was useful. I was good at organizing things. And I think when you seem to be good at organizing things, because you can organize thoughts and you can visualize things and you can use all these tools, project management is quite an obvious place to go. And I really quickly realized that if you want to earn good money in project management, you need to run the biggest tech program, because all of the big transformations were tech-based. So if you wanted to be earning the big bucks, you had to be in the big tech spaces. And so I kind of, again, pushed on quite a few doors and definitely started to find myself as the one in the room, kind of the woman in the room, and kind of always felt strangely comfortable in that room. I think, I don't know, maybe I just grew up believing I was okay to be the one that was different, just didn't care at all. I was never put off by men that didn't kind of want me to be there. I think because I'd gone through my career not thinking I was deserving of being in the room, but making myself useful to have a position in that room. And I think I carried that on through my whole career. Anytime I've ever joined a project or joined a leadership team or even joined a board, my first thought is always, not what can you do for me, but what can I do for you to prove that I'm useful? And so I very much always went into these rooms going, okay, how am I going to make myself useful to all these individual people? And I think that helped me feel more confident to be welcome in those rooms, as I was always doing things for people. And then if I fast forward, and I get to the end of my sort of career as a corporate employee, my last 8-9 years was spent in a big AI engineering company, and absolutely loved my time there. I was a senior director of value, which was just a phenomenal role because it was really about connecting what are we doing to what are we going to get for it. Something that I think, speaks to everybody. It speaks to the CEO, it speaks to the CFO, it speaks to the people team, it speaks to everybody. And I guess I started to really see that big track back that happened in industry when DEI suddenly went from being the unlocker of innovation to being this politically fraught, slightly dirty word. And I think I was, in an AI company that had just IPO'd and so was suddenly far more exposed to its US markets, suddenly far more involved with the US government, suddenly looking at and working with the OpenAIs and the Metas, and so very much being influenced by US ways of thinking. The new CEO was an American. And yeah, I can't beat around the bush about it. I just saw this massive drop off. We'd had this incredible diversity and inclusion agenda, a really incredible agenda. We pushed people to prove that they were learning all the time. It wasn't about a tick box exercise coming along to a few training sessions. You had to show that you were learning about diversity and bringing that learning to your team. And I thought that was brilliant. And I saw that explosion of understanding that just goes so far beyond just teaching. It was people bringing their own understanding in, which was great. And that just ended. It just all ended. It just felt like we suddenly decided overnight that not only that people didn't matter, but that they weren't any longer the unlocking factor to innovation. And that just didn't sit right with me. It felt like, okay, maybe this isn't now the place for me. And I guess what I was seeing that across the whole world and across all industry, especially where AI, it was almost like companies were going, people or AI. Well, let's go with AI because that feels more exciting. And I was kind of sat, not actually that involved in AI, but sat there kind of going, hang on a minute, diversity has always really worked for me. Diversity is what made my teams so commercially successful. It's what made them so innovative. I really believed in the power of it. I'd seen it work, and I couldn't understand why organizations were suddenly pretending like it didn't work anymore. And so then AI comes along and we started our own company. My husband had already started the company. He was already overwhelmed with interest in wanting to know how to bring AI in. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to do this, I want to do it alongside the people work. I want to work with organizations that are committed to their diversity agendas, committed to their people and their values, and are wanting to use AI to further that, not as an exchange from it. And probably one of the really critical stories that I'll share was a conversation with a really wonderful researcher called Sarah Weier. She's a studying PhD professor, and she teaches computer science. And I met her in one of my many kind of, women's networking events. And she told me about the research that she was doing into trying to understand the data in AI. Because we don't know what data goes in. These companies won't share with us what data they're training on. And, we've got this whole black box problem of how they learn. And so the only thing that we can do is we can ask as difficult a questions as we can of these models to try and get it to reveal to us, what did you learn? What was in the data? What's gone into this? And she did a really simple experiment where she asked ChatGPT, one of the earliest models of ChatGPT, what can a woman? What should a woman? Why do women? What can a man? What should a man? Why do men? And she asked these questions, and she asked them millions of times, and then analysed all of the answers to those questions to see what it would reveal about what the AI had fundamentally learned about men and women. The more you ask this question, the more responses you get, and the results just absolutely blew my mind. So she looked at both the topics and the sentiment. With men, the sentiment was just positive. Overwhelmingly, the data didn't say anything negative really about men. It was pretty positive, and the top topics were strange things like God and superheroes. And I think urination was quite high up as well. Strange, like drinking. It was just a strange reflection on what men think of themselves, the position that men have. And then you look at what the data said about women, and it was terrifying. The number one topic, and all of these questions answered came back to sexual violence, and the sentiment was always negative. Why do women complain about being raped? Was genuinely one of the ways that the AI answered that question. And so she's kind of looking over this data and going, shit, we've got a problem. The problem is not that AI is programmed to be biased. It's not that these AI companies are themselves programming bias into them. It's just our data reflects something really horrible and quite scary about society. It reflects a level of conversation that is just fundamentally misogynistic. It's not a bit of misogyny. It's not in a few places. It's not just in the workplace. It's prolific. And I think I was terrified by that, genuinely terrified. And that kind of changed everything. We started to do different bits of work, and I now very much split my work between the consulting work to pay the bills, the work that we do helping organizations use AI in a really people-centric way, and then all of the work I do supporting government bodies and charities and thinking groups to say, how do we think bigger about the impact, not just to women, but the impact to people? How do we make AI work meaningfully? And so that kind of took me to the work that we're doing today.
Wow.
Sorry.
That was so interesting. I would love to just backpedal really quickly to the study, why do women? I am so interested in how data is trained and what it's taking and what it's also feeding back. One of my friends is a school teacher, and she was saying, the kids are asking AI anything that they think that they can't ask anyone else. And imagine getting those like stereotypes about women and sexual violence and violence against women and girls from a chatbot, and it's being given to children.
Yeah, I think
terrifying.
It's absolutely terrifying. I think one of those first early models with ChatGPT, 22% of the data it was trained on came from Reddit. 22%. We often say, when you're thinking about, people, we talk about trust a lot. And when we think about comparing the way that you would ask a question of Google and the way that you would ask a question of ChatGPT, it's really interesting when you think, okay, if I ask a question about the history of women and I ask it into Google, Google's going to present me with, let's say, 10 sources. It's going to present me with sources that are institutional sources. It's going to present me with research. It's going to present me with various documents, with historical information, Wikipedia. And it's also going to present me with results from social media, from X, from a whole load of different things. Now, which one of us, when asking a question about the history of women, would choose to go to a social media source to answer that question? We wouldn't. We would all naturally, we go down that list and we find the source that we feel confident in. And that's the single biggest risk when you transition to asking that same question of AI, is that AI is going to give you this beautifully crafted answer. And what people are not stopping to think about is, let's imagine that's Google. let's imagine that we can say, can you just tell me exactly where those opinions came from? Can you tell me exactly where those facts came from? We don't do that. We don't get to see that. We've got no insight into that. But because it's tied up beautifully in a bow for us with this beautifully professional writing, we read it and we kind of just take it. And it's just like, and I keep on saying, it's like taking the first thing you see on Google. None of us would ever take the first thing we see on Google. Yeah. Presented with a choice, we make a conscious, critical decision. When we're not presented with a choice, that critical decision is still there, but it's just invisible to us. And so we just move on. And I think that's that big, huge difference that we've got to get our minds around.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think that AI should never be trusted as its own source, because it's not its own source. It's loads of information, and how much of that is real, how much of it is fake, and also who is telling it to have these ideas, who's telling it, it's not balanced. It's not giving people the chance to make their own decisions. It's also, I think what people are learning now is to use ChatGPT as almost like a thought partner to get it to challenge their own thoughts.
Very much, yeah. And it can be brilliant. It can be absolutely brilliant at that. It's what we always teach is don't outsource your thinking. Use it to absolutely exponentially improve your thinking. And I think that's one of the misconceptions actually that I worry about, especially in the way that women are uptaking and learning about AI is we've gone through this big curve, Gartner calls it the peak of expectation for overinflated expectations, followed by the trough of disillusionment. And I think, at the top of the peak, we were all talking about productivity, 10 times productivity, 10 times speed, 10 times faster. In the trough of disillusionment, from a thinking perspective, we're all now thinking AI slop. Everything sounds the same. Everything looks the same, losing our cognitive ability, losing our authenticity. And I think what that's meaning is that if you don't have an understanding of how to use AI, you could easily look at that and go, well, why would I want to learn this thing that potentially is going to put my job at risk and I'm going to lose my critical thinking? And yet the other side of it is, and this is me on a daily basis at the moment, it's me just better. Just far better. It's me being challenged in a way I've never been challenged before. I'm having these phenomenal conversations with this thing, with this machine where I'm saying, this is what I'm thinking about. Help me think about this deeper. Challenge my thinking. Find the gaps in my thinking. And it's that we're worrying about it over-validating us, but God, on the opposite side of that, it can do a brilliant job as a critical analyzer of your thinking.
Exactly. I think this time last year, I remember saying to someone, AI will never be the silver bullet that kills the human race, but put the two of us together, and honestly, we could go leaps and bounds in the things humans can do. Even just looking at the NHS and what the NHS is doing, or what the whole healthcare system globally is doing using AI, or even in engineering or harm prevention, like what I do. I use AI, and it can be used for so much good, but I guess it's making sure that it is being used for good and prioritizing that as well.
I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, isn't it? Really, we're thinking about how it can really bring fairness. That's what this is key to. And I think your initial story, Claire, really shared your own values as well. I think there's something huge about hard work and tenacity, because I know for a fact that moving from a PA into any role is really difficult. You get typecast, you get stuck in a box. You're so good at your job that the person you're supporting doesn't want to lose you. And then moving from project management to actually very senior roles in tech is a really impressive curve in itself. So there's a lot of tenacity, a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of perseverance that you've had to show. But then you also connected that with really strong values. being part of an organization that was sort of U-turning on the DEI space actually didn't align with who you are and what you're about. And so you're bringing that to this work that you're doing now. So I just didn't want to gloss over a really impressive career and what you continue to do and the difference you continue to make. And I know that over your career, you would have seen a lot of transformations. Every organization that my company was working with in the last year has said, we're going through a transformation at the moment. But I'm sure you've seen many cycles. And so I just wanted to think a little bit about inclusive design. It's been a stated value in tech for a long time. With AI, has anything actually shifted structurally, or has the industry just got better at marketing the fix while doing the same old stuff? Are we being able to be better at inclusive design with AI at the heart?
We have the potential to, I think. I think if there's one thing from an inclusion perspective I love about AI, it's people talk about AI as this mirror. The whole bias issue, we all often describe it as we've fed it all of our historical data, and all it's going to do is it's going to hold a mirror back up to us when we ask it a question like the question Sarah was asking, what can a woman do? That data that it's giving us is an incredibly important reflection on society right now. It's an incredibly important reflection on a business of its own data. And so I think this whole holding a mirror up thing, for me, it's the first time we have ever had that mirror held up to us. And our job now is to actually look in it. We talk about inclusive design. Whenever we're talking about technology, we're always talking about, who gets to use it, who it's going to support from an access perspective, how it's going to help us. But they're always nice to haves. We've never had a technology transformation that has had the rights of people and workplace equality and, societal impacts really at the heart of it. And I think it's a two-stage thing. The first thing is we have to actually bother to look in that mirror. We actually have to ask the difficult questions of these AI tools and reflect on what that means. Sarah Weier's piece of research there, the immediate thought can be, how do we get bias out of the data? Whose job is it to get the bias out? These companies are not doing a good enough job. But actually, there's a far deeper reflection in there, which is, shit, this is what people think. This is not just trying to fix the data. You can't fix the data. The data is an accurate reflection on what people think. So it's a moment in time to look in that mirror and be really bloody honest with ourselves about what that data says about us and therefore who we really are. And, you look at the progress that we've made, and I think lots and lots of women and lots of very privileged people think that over time we've just made all this brilliant progress and, women's rights and the rights of, equality in the workplace and the Equality Act and disability in the workplace, and now even LGBTQ rights and neurodivergent rights and all these things. But the data shows us something really different, and we've got to take notice of that. It's a moment to really look at that data and say, what does it really say? It's not a great story. It's not a great story at all. And I think with AI, we have got this huge opportunity, because I don't think organizations, certainly if I've got anything to do with it, organizations aren't going to be able to blindly walk through this AI transformation and tag on people impacts at the end. I think the EU AI Act is going to help stop them from just surfing through this transformation phase. But I think it's really incumbent on people leaders in organizations at the moment to recognize that this is one of the most consequential moments in probably the last 100 years of people leadership. They've spent the last 100 years helping us secure human rights, helping us secure equal rights, helping organizations do the right thing. But we're now at this huge moment where we could just undo all of that, or we could really make it happen. An AI could be the catalyst either way. And as ever, it's going to come down to who has a say, who's in charge, who gets to make the decision about how it gets used. It's far more important than what it can do. It's far more important than, the how it was trained and the data that went in. Well, we can't do anything about that, in truth. The guardrails that OpenAI or Anthropic are going to put around these tools, okay, they're always going to do the minimum. Of course, they're always going to do the minimum. We've got to start taking serious note of who are the people that are getting a say in this. And, I talk a lot about wanting to get women and wanting to get a wider group of diverse communities understanding and learning about AI, not because I think it's going to take your jobs or because I think, you need to keep up with men, but just because you've got to have your say. Your voice has got to be there in the mix. You got to be, and if you hate AI and you're skeptical and you don't want to trust it, brilliant. That's the voice we need in the room. I need that voice in the room helping the over-enthusiastic AI users, get reined in a little bit. But that feeling of this moment of AI being an opportunity for us to have our say, because it could go either way. Genuinely think it could go either way. If politics was to continue down the route that it's been in the last few years, and if we allow the only people that have a say in this to be the kind of, white Western man, then there's only one direction this is going to go in. It's not just about slowing down workplace equality. We are going to regress. So we're going to seriously regress. It's just going to happen so quickly. And we won't have we're not going to be able to pedal that back in 5 years when we realize that we've just, screwed things up. So it's kind of this moment. I just have this real feeling of it's this moment right now that we have to make those more conscious choices.
Yeah,
I can so agree. I was actually saying to my mum last night, we are walking on a fine line. Like even one person's voice, no matter how small they think it is, it really could be the deciding factor in which way the next 5, 10, 50 years even goes.
Yeah.
We're at this like biting point of politics and AI and like just it's amazing, and it's exploding in our faces, and we're in this AI industrial revolution type thing. And we've seen from history that it's like the people that have stood up for what they believe in can have the chance to make a difference. And I hope if anyone's listening to this and they think I can't say anything, you can use your voice, use it for good. Well, whatever you think good is, use it for whatever you want.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you said are so important, just to reiterate as well. I think one is this idea of the mirror. You hear people talk about AI as it, they, whatever, but recognizing that it's us, that, the data has come from us. If we engage with social media, technology, blogs, whatever, literature, the information has come from us. And I think when you realize it's you, not them, then you are more connected with AI than you've ever thought you are. And that second piece, which is actually, consciously engaging in a journey as opposed to sort of sleepwalking through life, actually consciously, whether we're thinking globally or more locally, how do we intentionally want to engage in this? Do I want it to write my emails, or do I want it to do something that, do I want to create an AI platform that makes a difference in people's lives? And you might want to do both, but you might put different amounts of energy into them. And I think, that message that you're sharing is so important for people to think about. It's not them, it's us. and also we can be intentional in the way that we decide to engage. And that gives us a lot of agency, doesn't it?
Huge amounts, yeah, if we choose to use it.
Yeah, 100%.
So I know you've got your inclusive AI practitioner program, and it teaches people when to trust AI and when not to. Which we had a guest, Artie, right at the beginning of our podcast, and she was talking about
our first episode.
Yeah, she was talking.
Wow.
Yeah.
she's amazing. She was talking about deep fakes and all the ways people get scammed, actually. And trust collaboration is, really important. This idea of AI literacy. If we could be literate, we must understand how to trust. But most, I think, courses skip that. So tell me, how do you teach it? And maybe what's the most common failure mode you see in how professionals relate to these tools once the novelty wears off?
So in terms of how we teach it, it's actually really easy. It's no great mystery, the trust issue with AI. But what you do have to do is, rather than starting the story from what can it do and the core features and what it can do for you, you do have to spend a bit of time going, how does it do it? And the moment you start talking about the how, and that's, I've worked with engineering teams for years. I'm very used to being the person in the room that's going, I'm sorry, can you put that in plain English for me? I have no idea what you're talking about. So I think I've brought a lot of that to the way that I talk about AI. And I've taken, rooms of over 50s, out of work, women through the same training as I've taken my mum through, as I've taken my 15-year-old son through, and everybody in between. And that includes CIOs and CTOs who have sat there scribbling notes going, I didn't realize that's how it worked. And it's just about really being honest about how this stuff works. It's an engineering field, it's a maths field, so it is complicated at its heart, but it's not. Also, there are really simple ways to describe how it's learning. And when you think about how it's learning and you take people on that journey in a very simple, plain English way, they come to their own conclusions. We don't have to say to people in our training whether you should or shouldn't trust. What we say is, let's understand how it's learning. Let's understand what it's learning. And now let's think about how we would apply our learning to that, because that's kind of the biggest difference between machines and people. I always talk a lot about your personal AI, your actual intelligence, and really recognizing how powerful that is at this moment, because a machine can only learn some data, find some patterns, and repeat them. So if it learns data about hiring, it'll find a pattern that says men are the preferred candidates, and it will make an assumption to pass that forward. It's far harder for humans, because when we learn, we place that learning into this huge behemoth of context. Everything we learned, everything we know, everything we feel, and where we want to go. An AI machine is not making a conscious choice about workplace equality when it says that men are the better candidates. That's a human job to do that. And when we teach people how it's learning, when we teach people what it's learning, and when we do it in a really simple way, we can then have really honest conversations with people that say, so this being true, what do we expect to see? What would you expect ChatGPT to say if I said, should I hire a woman? What would you expect ChatGPT to say if I said, are all people equal? Let's think about what it's learned. Let's think about the history of our data. Let's think about what that data says. And now let's think about what the AI is going to have learned. And then we talk about something that I think is really important, which is ideological bias. And this idea, then I think a lot of people think that these AI companies should be applying a set of bias guardrails that would stop a machine from saying that it should be a man over a woman. And so we talk about the idea of ethics as a very complicated and very nuanced topic. There is no globally agreed ethics. My ethics will be different to your ethics. As three women wanting to see diversity progress, we might make this assumption that, of course, we want to apply that type of ethics to how the data is looked at. But if we can apply our ethics, then guess what? Somebody else can apply their ethics. So whose ethics gets to win? Who gets to apply? So actually, it's far easier not to have anybody's ethics applied to it. Ethics has to be applied in the context of the user. You are the user as an organization owning that. That's where the ethics gets to be applied. And so when we kind of take people through that journey, the kind of should you, shouldn't you trust it becomes a very personal and a very obvious thing. And then I think we do some really nice exercises to think about that combination of how we apply our learning and the context that we would apply. I could show you a whole load of data right now that says that littering is good. I can show you, a bit of research. Littering is a really great thing. I'm going to show you the data. Here's the answer. Drop your waste on the ground. There's something about us as humans that says that doesn't make sense. I don't care what your data says. It just doesn't make sense to me to do that. You're thinking consciously about consequences. And when you go through those kind of exercises, it becomes really obvious. Would you put decisions in the hands of a machine without human oversight? And of course, everybody in the room very obviously then says, well, of course you wouldn't. Why would you even think to? And from there, you can then take that into very, very simple prompting exercises. Because again, I think people think that bias is a big tech problem. We talk about bias as a very individual problem. When you write a prompt, your language contains bias. When you upload some data, that data might contain bias. You are actually part of the problem. You are part of the bias problem. And then when you get your output, even if there's no bias in anything that you've put in, the output might have bias. The AI might be inferring your bias and validating and building on that. Do you have any idea what that looks like? Do you know how to spot it? How would we think about all of those little bias decisions all laddering up? And so you kind of take people on that journey that makes them realize that these problems aren't simple problems that sit in one place to be fixed. With AI, they become everybody's problems. And there's that real sense of personal accountability to go, would I trust a machine to take this decision? What input do I as a human want to have in that decision? Do I trust myself to be able to use this properly? And I think that's where we come out the sessions, I think, with people who have got not just functional skills, but thinking skills to use AI.
Amazing. It sounds brilliant. And I love the way you said AI, actual intelligence. Really like that. We spoke to someone recently and they said they change it around to IA, an intelligent assistant. So we're getting all of these acronyms.
Yeah.
And people will use the ones that land with them. Yeah. I think it's what you're saying is, we need to be taught critical thinking skills, don't we? It's really important to do that. I think it's easier when you're formed and been in your career a while because you've lived without AI for quite a long time, and you just have to be reminded. If you're not formed, if you haven't formed your thinking yet, I imagine it's more challenging. And our conversation is also making me think about a guest we had called Christian Ortiz, who's created an AI that is decolonizing AI. He describes it as. But in our conversation with him, he talked about feminist AI. He talked about AI that has built with a religious slant. And it goes back to the point you were making about the fact that we all have our own ethics and we all have our own lens on the world. And sometimes we might choose AI that has that same thought and feeling, thought process as us. But recognizing that even if we do, there's still a bias in that is worth understanding. Yeah.
100%. 100%. I think now we should really talk about something really exciting that you're leading on, the Inclusive AI Industry Guide project. From my understanding, you're translating inclusion principles into something firms can actually pick up and deploy, which is really, really cool. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit more about it and how you're building it so it forces a behavior change rather than handing the another artifact for people to wave around.
Yeah, let me tell you where it came from. So we decided a few months ago, just because I'm so deeply involved in so many communities talking about DEI and really recognizing that I felt that inclusion leaders had this big role to play at a time when we're losing our inclusion leaders, kind of like, where are they? Where's the funding? Where have they all gone? They're all losing their jobs. And so I did yet another ask of my poor co-founder husband and said, can I please do this piece of work? It's another complete freebie, which is a constant source of struggle in our business, is Claire wants to do everything for free. And I said, I think the DEI community needs AI training. They're not seeking it. They're not feeling part of the conversation. There's no funding. They're the last people in organizations to be offered it. And I think there's an enormous community of skills out there that we need in the AI conversation. Like, we really need these people. Can I please run a cohort purely for out of work DEI people for free, 6 weeks worth of free training? And so we did it, and we had this absolutely incredible cohort, 25, inclusion leaders, and it was brilliant. The quality of the conversation in these sessions was outstanding. And to support that cohort, and as part of something I've been building out and using with consultants, I built this framework. I built a framework called Bridge. And Bridge helps you to think about inclusion risks and people impact risks across the whole AI deployment lifecycle. So from the very beginning, thinking about making conscious choices about what we use and what we build and what we buy and the liabilities that we're buying in, all the way through to actually exposing and being fully transparent with people about where we're using it, how we're using it. And if they don't feel confident about our use in it, being able to come and talk to a human. So this framework sort of really came together. And at the end of it, I had that feeling of, I think we've got something really great here, but I am a tiny weeny consultant with a tiny weeny client base, and the amount of impact I'm going to have is always going to be tiny weeny. So how do I make bigger impact with this? How do I give this to industry and make a bigger impact? So I went to the UK AI, I work on their Women in AI working group. And I said, look, I want to put this out to industry. Help me to create an industry guide based on this framework. And rather than it being my piece of work or even the Women in AI's piece of work, I want to bring together a kick-ass group of people that will be listened to, people that can challenge this work to be the best that it can be, people that can then help to influence other organizations to think about this guide. And so that's what we've done. We've put together, I think it's now 40 absolutely incredible experts, leading voices from AI, from bias research, PhD researchers from King's College London, through to the most influential HR and inclusion and diversity voices. It's a kick-ass roster of people that want to see this guide come to fruition. And over the next 4 months, we're going to do the work to really put something out there that says, industry, you're going to have to pay attention to this because there is huge opportunity right now, but these are the risks. We are generating an enormous amount of agent capability, and every single agent that gets built in your organization is a risk, and it could cost you because it could also be a compliance risk. So we're being really honest about the fact that this is coming for you, and you can either harness it or it can harness you. Like, it's going to be one or the other. And our hope, so we launch it in the House of Lords at the end of October, I think, with this wonderful group of collaborators. And my hope is that we can then turn the guide into an industry standard and that we can get some funding to then build the toolkits, because the guide is really going to ask you lots of difficult questions. What we're then going to need is government to say, actually, organizations need support to answer these questions. And if we give them the support, then we're going to get a better deployment use of AI. We're going to get less risks. We're going to get less reputational damage. We're going to get less organizations, feeling the bite when the EU AI Act comes for them and they realize that they're completely non-compliant. That's no good for the economy. It's no good for UK businesses. So I'm hoping that we can create the momentum to create the need for far better guidance and support to help all organizations run as fast as they want to with AI without breaking people. I think that's just got to be, AI that works meaningfully for everybody. That's kind of the mission of the work.
Amazing. I love this. I'm excited for the launch of it.
I'm very excited.
I think also that you just didn't keep it small, that you've gone big, and decided to bring people together, created, collaborated, and really thought about what's necessary. And it just sounds like such a helpful guide, actually, that's going to come together. So yeah, really excited. And yeah, if people wanted to find out more about it, is it they just come to you on your LinkedIn, or what's the best way
find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, there's there will be leads that are leading this work. So we'll be talking about this a lot more on LinkedIn as we start to do this work. But yeah, come and connect with me if you want your voice to be heard through this work. I'd love to hear from you, where we've got people that represent disabled groups in the workplace, different ethnic groups in the workplace, different thinking styles, whether it's neurodiversity, the LGBTQ community. So we're really trying to make sure that the customer that's at the end of this, the people that are genuinely going to be potentially negative impacted, that those voices are really felt in this report and really heard loud and clear. So yeah, if you represent a community that you think needs to be heard in this report, link in with me, come and chat to me, get involved.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now we're on to the quick fire round, which is my personal favorite, because I just feel like you just get such amazing little snippets from people. So what is the most overhyped phrase in AI right now?
The AI bubble bursting.
Yeah.
I think to the average user, the bubble is not going to burst. The bubble will burst for some of the AI developers. They're not making any money. Some of them just aren't going to survive. So that's where the bubble will burst. I think people thinking that the bubble is going to burst and that that's going to impact us as users, I doubt it. I think AI is here to stay. I think the only thing that will really happen is we're going to have some tough conversations about costs. That whole tokenomics piece, I think that's going to hit organizations relatively soon.
100%. What is the best tool on your inclusive AI practitioner curriculum that nobody outside the program is talking about?
Best tool. I wouldn't say tool because we don't focus so much on tools, but I will say the best tip, and it is to set your preferences. Nobody seems to understand that you should set your preferences in your use of an AI assistant. It's going to have a dramatically different difference to how you interact and to how it talks to you. You can tell your AI assistant to think about diversity. And most importantly, the best tip I always give people, ask in your preferences, ask your AI to be honest about how the bias in its training data could impact its answer. What you'll get at the end of every response is a lovely disclaimer that says, my training data is heavily biased towards X, Y, and Z, and I am missing A, B, and C. It's that moment, it's like the Google search. It's that moment of critical decision making for us that makes us know where to go next. So change your preferences, people.
Amazing. And what is one piece of AI advice you wish every CEO would stop repeating?
The one bit of, do you know what? I think it's less advice that AI CEOs are repeating and more the advice that CEOs are being given. And I think that advice is experiment, 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 experiment. I think we've been talking about experimentation for so long now. We need to stop being more conscious. Experiments are scaling. Experiments are going on for far too long. We are experimenting with people impacts without realizing it. I think the time now is for conscious decision making, for conscious experimentation, and to make smarter choices.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for today's episode. It's been so informative and so interesting.
Perfect advice.
Yeah, perfect advice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Love speaking to you both.
Bye. That's it from us this week. If something in this episode stayed with you, do the small things that keep it moving. Like it, subscribe wherever you're listening, and send it to the person you think really needs to hear this. On another note, our book is out on the 27th of October, AI for Equity, Creating a More Equitable Society for All. It includes everything we argue about on the show, written down properly. And now, it's ready for pre-order. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.